Praetorian here. I had to address this. It keeps popping up. It's the symptom of a disease. For years, the topic of term limits has been brought up, almost always on what's thought to be the conservative side of politics. I early on initially accepted the idea. After all, it seems pretty attractive at face value. Put legislation or a constitutional amendment in place which limits the amount of time some horribly unpleasant or destructive person can occupy an office. That sounds pretty good. But face value is where that ends. One day, years ago, I was in a regular conversation with my father in which I was expressing advocacy for this concept on the exact same superficial terms. Gladly, this was met with a calm, even tone, and simple statement from my father. That's what elections are for. Immediately I knew he was right, and I had to acknowledge it. The straightforwardness of the rebuttal made clear the simplicity of the argument in favor of term limits, and how damaging the idea was in both concept and practice to the spirit of liberty. From then on, I've gathered and pondered information, attempting to establish a consistent philosophy of liberty which did not gloss over the superficial. I've also found that others aren't quite so easily swayed by that concise counterstroke to what I now see as a concept dangerous to liberty in both practice and principle. But, as I said before, I understand the allure. It's tempting to have a legal hardlock in place, which would function to exclude all of the long-term, problematic office holders we've seen for decades, again and again, seeming to continue to fail upwards until either the reaper or an unignorable, catastrophic blunder finally halts their ascent. Perhaps this was the same greener grass to which people were looking when term limits for the U.S. presidential office were instituted as a result of one of the most overreaching administrations in history. But does that really stop the problem? What are we saying by wishing for this? Aren't we really saying, our votes don't mean anything, we really have no power, please stop? I will add to this that it has been tried in the not-too-distant past, and was legally found unconstitutional as well. See the case Term Limits Incorporated versus Thornton in 1995. But the concern here isn't primarily a legal one. Frederick Bastiat, a 19th century liberal French economist of some repute, published a work entitled That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Unseen, highlighting the potential reality of unforeseen consequences in socioeconomic decisions. In the case of term limits, very little has been said widely about them, other than the standard perception that they'll keep those who have lived in government too long, those who have become complacent in their incumbency, those who have become out of touch. This was the claim in the above-mentioned court case, that it'll keep them out of the hazard of endangering the public with their misperceived notions of what is in whose best interest. But this ignores the value of singular individuals in the history of nations. The idea that individuals, on occasion, have been either the seed or the driving force of world-changing events. Yes, sometimes this has occurred for the bad as well as the good. But on whom does this reflect more? The individual promoting the evil, or the mob that inevitably enables them? If, in fact, we believe that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, then with whom does responsibility lie? This excerpt from the Declaration of Independence is not a prescription for these United States. It wasn't a prescription for the founders as individuals. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident," end quote. These are prescriptions for humanity. It's a declaration of absolute truth. It's a bright, burning torch of liberty lit to guide the way. And guide the way it has. It set the standard for practical, radical political change from that point on. And here we are in the product of it. A regressing, polluted product, but a product in which we still retain liberty with regard to government, quite unique to human history. So I think we should use it. Use it in the spirit in which it was conceived, capturing the principles under which it was made practical, rather than abandoning them to get lost in muddy arguments of pedantic relativism. One of those uses, one of those principles in practice, is to not further centralize a government, not to further detach it from its constituents, diluting a representation for which men voluntarily died. And term limits present us with a problem of centralization and of giving away power and placing political decisions into a mechanism which funnels choice, good or bad, away from the people from whom the just powers of government are derived. If the mechanisms of elections, impeachments, and recall elections are not currently adequate to that task, diagnose the problem. If the problem is you, heal thyself. If the problem is your neighbor, educate. If your car doesn't start, do you replace the fuel tank you have with a smaller one?